exists. You know. All right. So Rhinoceros is this Rhino down here. It's Rhino. Okay. We're using version 4. Just really briefly, I want to talk about what Rhinoceros is and like why Rhinoceros. I don't want to take too long, but I do think it's important to be critical about the choice of software that we use. There are so many 3D modelers. I'm sure some of you guys know a few of them: Studio Max, Maya, Cinema 4D. You know, there's all these different things. Why Rhinoceros, and why are we using this program in architecture? Rhino is a very precise modeler. And that's what it does extremely well. It's used in everything from jewelry manufacture to yacht design. It does complex curvature very well. And it has a lot of similarities in terms of the interface to AutoCAD, and so it's very familiar to architects. Okay? It's also very cheap compared to other modeling programs, which is also something that schools like. The student edition is like $185. You know, when you get into some other student editions of things, they can be upwards of $3,000, $5,000. So it's a very economical choice. It's very good at what it does. Okay, what it doesn't do well, it doesn't have parametrics by default. You need a plugin like Grasshopper to do parametric design. It is a destructive modeler, which is another thing. So when you use two objects to make a new object, those two objects disappear. So it doesn't save a history of those things in the way that other programs do. That could be valuable. It also doesn't do anything with animation, or it doesn't do it very well. It doesn't do rendering and materials very well out of the box. So there are reasons why you'd use other pieces of software. But for what we're going to be using Rhinoceros for today, and what we use it for as architects, it's very good. I'm going to go ahead and close these. When you start your copy of Rhinoceros, I'm actually going to go ahead and open up the correct file here. Okay, give it a second. When you start Rhinoceros, you'll see these 4 windows. It's going to open up to this sort of like default window placement. Okay, none of those other windows are going to be open. And whenever this finishes thinking, I'm going to show you how to turn them back on again. Okay. What else can I talk about while this is thinking? So in Rhinoceros, reason why there are 4 windows, if you've never used a 3-dimensional modeler before, is we have a problem. There it is. Casa Forget. Bula. Yeah. Is that, you know, we're working in 3-dimensional space, and you can see here there's actually some perspective distortion, right? The screen that we're working on is 2-dimensional, but the space we're working in and the building that we're working on is 3-dimensional. And so you need orthogonal views, like plan, section, elevation, things like that, left view, top view, bottom view, in order to be able to understand the relationships of things within the proper scale and, you know, within the proper sort of things that are actually oriented to each other properly. Whereas in the perspective, if you designed in perspective, they'd be distorted. It would be hard to find those relationships properly. Okay, so you need multiple views. You need to work in multiple views in order to be able to construct things in 3D. Okay, and in fact, should we get right? Where you work in Rhinoceros, it's actually, you know, like bidirectional. So as I'm working in one viewport, everything else updates. So you can see I'm working in perspective, but you can see in the different views, like in how I'm working in the top view, you can see the plan of it. In the front view and in the right view, you can see the side view of it. You can see, though, that where I've chosen to draw it, it's actually cut off from the top view. But if I wanted to make something like a square, right, it would be easier to start in top view. And then if I'm looking at the height of it, it'd be easier to work in, say, the front view or in like the right view. It'd be difficult to actually get a sense of what I'm doing. That gives me a sense of what I'm doing in 3-dimensional space, that perspective view. Okay, so that's what these different things are. And these are all actually cameras. They're considered cameras by the system. Okay, so that's the basic idea of the interface. Also, another thing about cameras is that when you're working in 3-dimensional space, you're working with things that have very, very complex geometry. They have a lot of, they're made up of points and lines and planes. It's important to be able to understand what's happening in it. And so there are different types of views within each of those cameras. Right now we're looking at a wireframe, right? You guys understand the principle of a wireframe. I mean, it's almost literally like a scaffold from which this thing is constructed from. It's kind of like an X-ray of it, okay? If you want to see what it looks like, you know, in the real world, you can right-click the this little tab, that's the name of the camera, And you can change the type to something like shaded. And so now I'm looking at it, I can't see what's behind it, but I can get a sense of how it's actually shaded. I get a sense of its actual presence in that like three-dimensional world. These other viewports that I see are not shaded. They're still in wireframe. So I can actually have different views of different things. I can have different types of views of different things in order to understand what I'm doing in three-dimensional space. Okay? There's other types of views. Rendered actually gives you a sense of what it might look like if you hit the render button. It's not really true. Ghosted is a hybrid of wireframe and a shading view, so you kind of get the best of both worlds, but I find it confusing at times. There's X-ray, which actually turns off some of the depth effects of ghosted. So they have certain principles, but I tend to stay within wireframe and shaded. Okay, I tend to work I have like a shaded perspective port, so I can kind of get a sense of what's going on, and then I work in wireframe because it's so much more like line for me when I'm working in these other viewports. Okay, so cameras, we've got the camera types. The next thing I want to talk about is how to navigate the viewport. You guys know this from AutoCAD. You know when you can pan a drawing, you can zoom into a drawing. Okay, these are the things that you need to know how to do in Rhino. Zoom is the mouse wheel, in and out, okay? To pan, you want to use the shift. I'll actually skip ahead to something else. Panning is the mouse wheel. To do like an orbit, you hold the right mouse button on your mouse and you move around. And if you're not used to moving in three-dimensional space, you really want to get used to orbiting. You really want to get comfortable with that idea of kind of, actually being able to pull around at this. And, if you zoom and orbit, you can really get in, once you get really good at it, you can find exactly what you want. Panning, if you're in the 3D port, you hold the right mouse button and shift at the same time, and that accomplishes a pan. So I can pan, zoom, orbit, and I can find things very quickly in three-dimensional space. And you'll get very fast at this, very good at this. So pan, orbit, zoom. When you're in an orthogonal view, panning is just the right mouse button. You don't really orbit orthogonally. All you need is pan and zoom. This is like AutoCAD. So panning is just right mouse. Okay, so pan and zoom. There's other controls up here. If you do, you'll notice when I mouse over some icons, you can see that there's a tooltip that has the left mouse button, and then there's one that says the right mouse button. You see where the icon turns dark over the mouse. So if I single click, then I get zoom extents, which fills the viewport with all of the objects. You guys know this from AutoCAD, probably. If I right click, it's going to zoom all the viewports instantly to all of those. Okay, so that's a handy thing to know how to do. When you're working in 4 viewports, sometimes it's more important to get more real estate in your view. So if you do a double click on your viewport, you get the entire screen to maximize. If you double click again, it'll minimize. Okay. You can also arrange your viewports, like you can pull these over and do all kinds of funky, sort of like Hollywood Squares things. And then if you want to redo it, you can just click on this button here for 4, and this will go back to like the default viewports again. Okay.
Do you have to click on the screen you want to work in order to work in that screen?
Yeah, I mean, when you make like when you choose something in the viewport, it makes that screen active.
Same with panning, zooming, and orbiting?
Yep. If your mouse is over that's the action that takes over.
You don't need to click on the screen.
You don't need to. No.
Okay.
Doesn't hurt though. Okay. So that's that idea. And then if you want to change a camera, so you can right click and you can go to set view, and these are all the different types of cameras you have. Okay. So top view, bottom view is the flip of the top view, left and right, front and back, and that's relative to the original coordinate space of it. Okay, so front would be like a south elevation, back would be a north elevation. Okay, that's relative to space, and then perspective. So if you want to so I could have 2 different perspective views, and if I move this around again, everything updates, all at the same time. Okay, so I can change this to top view. Whatever I want to do. Okay. You can also, and this is one thing that I want to start to talk about is the way that the interface works in Rhinoceros is triply redundant. It's like the space shuttle. Okay. You can do everything 3 different ways. You can click on the icons if that's something that you like doing. Wow, actually, did something to this. Okay. Huh. Okay. My mouse won't go outside the window. What did I do? Oh, here we go. Okay. If you if you want to use the icons, you can do that. If you hold down the mouse button, these will actually spill out, and you can use other types of lines and things, and I'll leave these up to you. Then you can close them. You can also go up to the menu, and you can find what you want. So if I want to make a box, I can make a box by going to solid. And then these are different ways of making a box. I can click on the box icon, or I can type into the parser, and this is where it's like AutoCAD. I can start typing in box, and then it'll let me start the command that way. So there's 3 different ways to do it. Just like AutoCAD, though, you should get familiar with the parser. This is how the pros work. You have one hand on the keyboard, one hand on the mouse. Okay, it's really fast to be working this way. When you start a command, just like in AutoCAD, it's going to tell you what to do. So if I start a box, it's going to say, tell me where the first corner of that base is. Okay, so I'm going to start and then the next command says, I want the other corner of the base, or give me a length of that. And then lastly, it says, give me the height. Okay, so you follow the instructions, and it tells you what to do. Okay, we're not going to be doing any modeling, but I just want you to know, when you use some of the commands, if you want to know what it's doing or what it expects you to do, you need to read the instructions. Okay. The other thing that comes up when you're using a command in Rhino is you can see that there's actually these different settings here. So there's you can change the way that it draws the box in this case. So let's say I want to draw a box from the center. I could press C, because C is underlined. That's the hotkey for that. Or I could actually click center, and then it'll let me use that mode. So I can click C, and now I can draw a box from the center outwards. Okay. So there could be alternate settings within the command. And so that's a general kind of overview of how Rhino works in terms of the interface. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about with the interface, and then I'll go into the building and the camera settings, is you're going to need a couple of other panels while you're working in order to help you work with cameras. Okay. The first is the properties panel, and this is like an AutoCAD. Like every object has properties, right? It has an XYZ location. It has a material. It has information about it. To access the properties panel, you press F3, and it pops up. Okay, it occupies a space. So you can see here it says this is actually giving us information about our view, because I don't have anything selected, so it's talking about the view. This is a perspective view. It gives us the camera like lens length, where the camera is. This is really critical stuff. This is what we're going to use. Okay, so properties. The other thing you're going to be using is the layers palette, and this again should be familiar with you from AutoCAD or Photoshop, layers, right? So you can access that by typing in layer, press enter, and you'll get the layers palette, okay? And we'll talk about that in a minute. So you'll need these to be working, and you'll see on the laptop it begins to eat up your real estate pretty fast, okay? You can also right-click this is the layer, this tells you what layer you're on. If you right-click that, it also pops up layers, right-click. Okay, so that's the interface. That's the basic interface. And now I'm going to talk about using the camera. All right, so once you have your file opened up, go ahead and take a look at the model. And you can see that if you open up the layers panel, I've arranged things on different layers here. The entire model is under a layer group. The walls are in a separate layer. You have the railings on this layer, the structure, and the site, which is a large like multi-block area. Okay, so you can turn things off and on to help you understand the building a bit better. You can also change your camera to a wireframe, and you notice that each layer has a different color, and that's purely just a function of the way you have the file set up. They're not actually like materials that have those different colors. Okay, they're actually all the color gray. Okay, so anyway, this is a helpful way to think about your model. You can lock a layer, which is actually a way to prevent you from accidentally selecting something on that layer. So if you see it in shaded, actually I can't pick anything on that green layer. Okay, because I have it locked. So that's really useful to do. Another thing you can do is you can choose specific objects with the mouse. You can actually use your mouse to click them, or you can make a window and pick them. If you want to add to a selection, you hold down Shift. And sometimes when you choose something that's near something else, you get a pop-up window and it allows you to choose the thing you want to choose. Okay. To remove from a selection, hold down Control and click, and that will take away something. Okay. You can choose some selections, right? And you do different things to them. You can hide them. You type in hide, H-I-D-E, and that will remove it. It doesn't delete it though. It's not gone, and it's not, the layer hasn't changed. I haven't turned the layer off and on. I've just kind of placed it into some kind of like a file buffer, and then I can make it come back by typing in show. Okay, and that works with objects from multiple layers. So I could take things from the red layer and the green layer, and I could hide them. And that's just a quick way, so it's a nice way for me to take off the side of this building so I can actually look inside of it. Another thing you could do is you can lock objects, so I can choose some objects, the mouse, and click on them. And then I can say lock. And they turn gray, and I can't actually pick them. I'm actually picking what's behind it because it's locked. Okay? And so when you have those objects locked, it's similar to locking the entire layer, but again, you can lock specific things and you can lock things across multiple layers. And to unlock them, you just type in unlock, and they'll come back. Okay, so hide, show, lock, unlock. It's pretty useful. Okay, so that's the last of that command of the different commands. Let's go ahead and look at using a camera. I'm going to go ahead and go to the 4 views. I have my perspective view. And the way that I like to work, there are different ways to make a camera, but what I like to do is I like to use the perspective view to set up, roughly the kind of view that I want. Okay, so just using pan and orbit and zoom, I get the view that I want, and then I go into View, Set Camera, Show Camera. And you can see that when I do that, you can see this camera apparatus appears. And it appears in all the other viewports. So as I move the camera in this viewport, it is going to update here. Okay, so let's take a look at what we get when we have a camera object. And this is a different perspective viewport. So you can see that this is the point that I am viewing things at in this perspective view, and this is what we call the camera point. Okay. And then the target is this point that's a line that's drawn from here to here. And the target is what the camera is aimed at. Okay? And then we have the focal length, or the sort of like the focus point. And that is basically the measuring plane. And then lastly, we have this kind of pivot point, or actually not lastly, but this is the pivot point, and if you do this, it'll rotate the camera. You don't want to mess with that. We'll look at that later. And then it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to turn some things off here. There's actually a 5th point that's inside the camera, and I call this the armature point. And the armature point moves the entire camera. Okay, let's take a look at that stuff and what it actually does with respect to the camera. I'm going to go ahead and lock all the layers. Actually, I could have just locked the whole from there. That would have worked. Let's try that. Yeah, that's easier. Okay, so that locks all the layers. I do that because I don't want to accidentally choose anything. I want to just mess with the camera. Okay, so first things first, let's go back to the camera point and see if I move the camera point. I'm not moving anything else. Let's zoom out a bit here. If I move the camera point, I'm just moving it in the top view. So I'm not moving it up and down, I'm moving it left and right, but say I can move myself across the street. So it's like where you take the perspective from is this first point. So that's the top view. If I go to a side view, like the front view, or a left view or right view, I can move the camera point up and down. So up gives me this kind of helicopter view. Down might give me a worm's eye view. And I can also move it in one plane, depending. So right now I'm moving it left and right, so I can move it very close to the building. I want to move it closer. So again, using multiple orthogonal viewports, I can get the view that I want. Okay, And let's go in and open up the properties panel. You can see some things here. So like as I move the camera point, make sure I've got that. When I'm in the perspective view, which is the camera that I've been manipulating, I have access to the Z location of the camera, which is the viewpoint. So if I wanted to make this camera 6 foot high, I could type in 6. Okay, and the target point, right, which is this other point here, and I can also manipulate that. I can actually type in any value I want for those things. So again, the Z location is the height, X, Y, Z. Z is the height. So again, if I wanted, let's say 50 foot in the air, right, or 1 foot off the ground, that's going to change the camera. Okay, so again, this only becomes available when you're actually in the camera that you're manipulating. A mistake I made earlier was if I have a point chosen, it actually doesn't change anything here. Okay, it's only when you're in the viewport that you can control that. Seems a little backwards to me. The target point is something that I have been talking about. So the target is this other point, and the target's what the camera is aimed at. So if you move the target, so again, my position doesn't change, like the viewpoint, but what I'm looking at changes. So as I move left and right, as I move that point, up and down. Okay, you can begin to see that. So again, the camera point and the target are the two important things. And the target can also be, if I'm in that perspective view, in this case, the camera that I'm manipulating, I can change that. So I can manipulate the target. Let's move myself up to human side, and then I can look at, so I'm looking at a target 12 foot off the ground. So that's different. Okay, I'm looking at a target 24 foot off the ground. So you can manipulate that that way as well. And so again, moving it up and down, moving it in XY space in the top view, you can get a very particular view. Another thing that's interesting is when you're in perspective, you can change the lens length. So I could type in a lens length, and the larger the lens length, the kind of this actually gets tighter, and the lines get more. The vertical lines get more vertical. If I make it smaller, let's say 10, you get a very kind of forced perspective, and you can see that the distortion increases quite a bit. Okay, so that's another variable that you can play with. And so if you did that, if you change that perspective, zoom out here, look at that, and you can change that by visually by playing with this focus point. You can see if I move that cone of vision, I can actually interact with it. You don't see it update here, but if I go back to my perspective, you can see that that's changed. So this point actually stretches that box, and that's going to say what's in the view. Look at, this is your measuring plane, and this is what's out on it. And you can see that we actually catch some of the sidewalk here and some of the sidewalk there. And so that is actually what we're seeing in this viewport. Okay, and again, the perspective is actually quite forced. Okay, we'll look at in a minute how to make that a bit less distorted, but that's something that happens sometimes when you're setting up a view. I mean, think of a fisheye lens. You can see a lot, you can see a very wide field, but it actually creates quite a bit of distortion. Okay, one last point I want to make about these 2 points I've been playing with, the sort of viewpoint or the camera point and the target point, is that if they're both the same Z height, that you will get a different effect. So let's say I'm on the Z 6 foot, and if I take the Z of the target and make it the same, you can see that that actually creates those parallel lines that we want. Okay, so again, if the Z's are the same, you will get back the parallel lines. Okay, and so this view is not very good right now because it actually cuts off the top of the building. So what can we do? We can pan, hold down Shift and right click, and we can pan that view up and down. And look at what's happening in that front view. You see that? The whole thing is moving, but the camera point and the target point are not moving. Okay, this is a nice architectural view, right? It's very stable. The vertical lines are vertical, right? It's a very kind of confident view. We might actually call this is a 2-point perspective, right? We don't like to say that around Thomas, but that's true in this case. All right, if you begin to move one of these points up and down, you introduce a third point, so to speak, and these begin to vanish, right, down, or they begin to vanish up, like one could imagine, okay? But if those 2 points are the same, again, if you go to perspective, you can verify this. If the 2 points are the same, then you've got what we would call maybe a 2-point perspective, okay? And so, I can view down this corner. What if I wanted to view down the other one? I could pick my camera point and then move this camera point this way, and so now I'm viewing down this hallway. And again, panning is useful because it doesn't affect that. And if I zoom, so I can actually zoom and see what zoom's doing. Actually, in the camera, zoom is moving the camera point in and out. Okay, and it's changing, the sort of field of view here. One way to move the entire camera without moving it in the viewport by panning is to use the armature point, which is the center point. And so I can grab it and I can move this entire piece, in and out and up and down, and that's not going to affect those 2 points. Okay. Now I warned you about this other point though. So we looked at the camera point, target, which is the center point in here. Actually, let's turn this off. This center point is the target, armature point, and then this point, which is the kind of focus point, is actually going to increase and decrease the focal length, which is actually the measuring plane, right? So it's actually giving us the vanishing points along the measuring plane. This point right here is not something I want you to mess with. It's not a good idea. So if you pull that point, it's going to rotate your camera. Okay. Now when that happens, you can't do a Control-Z undo. It's actually because the camera uses a separate set of undos. If you do that though, if that's something that happens, what you can do is you can go to View, and you see Undo View Change, and it says Home. The Home key will do that. If you get into your camera and you continue to press Home, you may be able to undo it. Okay. If you've done a lot of moving and you've accidentally really shifted that point, you may not be able to undo it. Okay. So just be really careful about that point. When you're choosing in the top view, this is where this actually happens quite a bit. When you click on that point, okay, look in a side view at which point you're selecting. If I choose this point, right, the first camera point, you can see how that one lights up, the top view. Don't do that. Select the second one, and that is going to be your target. Okay? And so then, if I'm moving that, I'm moving the target, which is what I want in almost every case. Okay? So, those are the selections for a basic camera view. When you've got a camera view that you like, let me go ahead and adjust this a bit here to get one that I do like. This is pretty distorted, but I'm going to go with it. Let's get in here. So maybe I'm interested in looking at this corner. This isn't perfect by any means, but let's go with it. So I'm going to looking at this kind of condition between these two entrances here and this emergency stair. And I'm going to go into View and go into Set View and Name Views, right? And you can say Save, and this might be a camera that I'm interested in looking at. Maybe I'm interested in like threshold here, so I can say threshold 1, okay? And then you can save that view, okay? Then you can go in and you do anything you want. You can rotate your camera view around, to some other thing, and whenever you want to get back to it, you can right click and say Set View, Threshold, and that will actually go back to it. So you've always got it saved. You can also go in and say, go to Set View, Name Views, and then click Restore, Okay, and that'll actually pop it back. So whenever you want a view saved, you're going to save it, and you're going to do 9 of these. You're going to do 3 cameras for each theme, so that's 9 cameras. So you'll save 9 cameras. Okay, that actually shows up also if you go set view. You can actually jump to whatever view you want. So, again, that's going to be a really useful thing for you. I mean, it's pretty much necessary for this assignment. Okay, and that's going to show up under the properties. It's going to tell you which camera you have. And cameras don't belong on layers. They're their own thing. So, just kind of be aware of that. One thing I want to talk about when we're at this point is how you do an interior camera. So you've seen a lot of these things. So let's talk about, what's the procedure? Like, what's the way that we've been doing it? I'm going to start from a perspective view, typically, and maybe I start outside the building to get a view that's pretty good, or maybe I try to do inside. And you can see that the problem with when you're inside is, it's very compressed, and these aren't really good interior views. So, okay, I'm going to start inside the building with a perspective view, and then I go to top, and I'm going to go to set camera, show camera. Actually, I apologize. I'm going to go to perspective, which is the camera that I had, and let me just toggle show camera, and you can press F6. There we go. Okay, so now that's right. So take the view that you want, and then turn on the camera. So I'm in the top view. You can see my camera. See this very narrow cone? I'm just catching part of the stair here, catching part of. I could be catching part of the other stair, but I'm not. So instantly, what I can do, go to perspective, and I can change the focal length, change the lens length to something smaller, and you can see how much more of the space that I get. Okay, so that actually opens up quite a bit. There might even be too much distortion. So let's dial it back to maybe 20 or maybe 15. Okay. You can think, I don't exactly know what this pertains to. You might think of it as the number of millimeters in the lens. So like a 35 millimeter lens is a pretty standard focal length. Okay, so but 15 is maybe going to give us a little wider arc. Okay, so I might do that. One thing that I probably want to do is maybe set the Z to be the same. So maybe again 6 feet. And that's pretty interesting. And maybe that's not actually catching as much of the space as I want. So what I could do is I could go into the target, and I can move the target up. That maybe gives me an interesting view. I can move it back down again. Remember, press home to undo view changes. Ah, I ran out of that. Okay. Well, anyway, I can just type it in. Let's go back to perspective. I hit undo too many times. I locked it up. Alright, so I had a little bit of a program crash there, which happens with Rhino. So be sure to save your file often. It's not infallible. So anyway, I was looking at an interior camera, and again, so I'm in this space, and I have maybe the Z location pretty similar, so 6 and 6 again for regular human height. And what I can do is, once I'm in that space and I've got a good lens length, you can move yourself around by moving the armature point. Again, look at the different views and what they represent. So if I'm standing at the foot of the stair in plan, I can move the target point carefully, to align with the stair. And then if I can move that view, up. Okay. So if you're careful and you make use of all the different views, make use of the top view, make use of the front view, a different right view. So I can put myself on top of this balcony here, looking down. So if I move my point, up. In the right viewport. again, I have my target, right? So I can move my view so that I'm viewing the center of the space. You should have a lot of control, okay? And this is what we're talking about, where there's no excuse for a bad camera view, because you have complete control over all of this, and you can always go in later. You can save as many views as you want to. So again, I'm back to a regular view, and maybe from here I can begin to go up and down, but a little bit of distortion is okay, happens. So you can see, like, there's this door actually behind this column here. That's maybe not a good view. So knowing that, I can take my camera and I can begin to move around so that there is no column, blocking my view. Okay. I'm not doing the motions in the perspective view. I'm doing them in my orthogonal viewports. And I'm zooming and panning to make sure that I see what I'm doing. And I've got these in wireframes, so I get a sense of things. I'm using the type-ins, so this is a really precise way to work. Okay. So again, I've covered exterior, I've covered interior. Now I want to look at a last piece here, the last kind of camera. So one other kind of camera that I could do is, I call this like the Hitchcock camera. It's kind of like a vertigo thing. If I go to the back view of the building, which is the facade, I'm going to zoom into it. Okay. So I'm starting on an orthogonal view, in this case the back. And I could do this with the top. It's actually kind of interesting from a top view too. Go to the back, turn on the camera, so I can do F6, and you can see my camera. And you can see that the camera is actually, says it's parallel. I'm going to change that to perspective, and you already begin to see, the vanishing point in this, right? So I went from a thing where all the lines are parallel, there's no vanishing point, which is orthogonal, to a perspective, okay, for that back camera. And you can see that actually I have a camera now in my top viewport. But if I go to this back view again, the camera that I'm looking at, I can go into the set camera, and I can adjust the lens length, and I can zoom myself in. I can adjust the length of it, which is going to bring that in closer. And so it's a good way. Maybe I can pull off some of the facade, you can hide it. It's a good way to look at that in a way that has some depth, but it's not flat, so I can see some of the sidewalls and things, and that might actually be of interest to us as a camera. Okay. Another thing you do is, once you got that camera, is you can go into set camera, and you can adjust the lens length and dolly, and you can see as I move back and forth, this begins to. So now it's it's very flat if I get very far away. If I zoom in, you can see it begin to pull as it becomes more and more distorted as I zoom in closer to it. And if I do that, and then if I pull back the camera, you can see that I've actually got more distortion than I had. Okay, so again, that's that. In the camera, I go to adjust lens length and dolly, and I can really, if I pull this thing really far back, and make the lens length very small, and then I pull the camera out again to get the view, you can see that it actually compresses that quite a bit. And that's actually interesting too. Let me go to a top view. You can do something kind of neat as well. I'm going to zoom out. So I'm in the top view, and I'm going to show everything, and then I'm going to hide the roof. And then remember, I go into projection, I go perspective, and I don't want to mess with it. I don't want to accidentally move the camera points. I can pan, and that's not going to affect it too much. And then if I go into set camera, adjust lens length and dolly, see, flat and distorted, and flat and distorted. And if I go into one of these viewports, I could pull that camera up a bit, and so I can get more distortion. Let me hide this actually. but I can still pick up on some of that detail. So that's my kind of Hitchcock camera. I like it because it kind of has that orthogonal, kind of starts orthogonally, but you do get to see the sides of things, which I find really interesting. Okay, so those are the various camera types, and again, be thinking about the themes and use the camera strategically. Okay, with control and intent, and then save your views. And then once you have views saved, and I'll go through that process again. I'm going to go view, set view, name views, and I might call this. This might have something to do. Well, I'm not going to make it up. It's going to be new top view. And once I've got that, always save your views whenever you've got something new, right? And you want to go in and you can say view, and I would maximize it like I did. So I double click, I'd say view, and go to capture, to file, and then I'm going to put it on my desktop. So and now I'll save it as a TIFF or maybe as a JPEG, and I would say new view. And you save those and then put those together into a PDF. Okay, you can do that in Photoshop or whatever. And that's what we're expecting you guys to do for Friday. If you have any questions about the tech part of it, let me know. About the design part of it, speak to your professor. I'll see you guys on Friday.